Over the last 5 years, the building industry has been transformed by way of innovations, thus creating a need for the appropriate upgrades, improvements, and revision of the national building codes.
With any building code, the primary aim is to ensure the health and safety of persons in and about buildings when you come to design any building. And when we think about here in Barbados, we may be more focused with regards to hurricane, earthquakes, and so forth. So when designers, architects, and engineers reflect on the building code, they're to consider these aspects when they're designing their buildings. The government is pretty well focused in setting up the legal framework, or the Building Act, that would empower the building code, and in turn will empower the Building Standard Authority, who's the agency that will enforce the building code.
To ensure that any new building material arriving on the market is safe and fit to stand the test of time, it must meet the requirements of the national and international standards.
You can't just invent something and then say you're going to use it as a building product. It has to be tested, and it has to have some kind of certification to ensure that it meets a standard. And that's how then you can apply it in Barbados terms in the building industry.
Taking precautionary measures to safeguard against fire is important to the planning and design stages of any building, whether concrete or wooden.
And when we speak about shuttle houses, for example, we know that there are some constraints when we're talking about shuttle houses, when you're thinking of an overall development. And we know they're allocated in small lots perhaps. And what the building code would go to speak about is fire precaution with regards to these types of houses, because they're very close. So the building code will speak about how you can build a house, how you can protect the internal lining to ensure that if there is a fire, it doesn't leap from one house to the next. So we would also speak about the boundaries. The boundaries may be more extensive than what we have at the moment, in order so we can prevent the problems from happening. And we've seen so many fires happening in shuttle houses. Even recently we've heard about one. So we need to capture this and ensure that we can be preventative in our methods when we apply the building codes. And that's really what it's about. It's about preventing problems before they occur.
Fire safety is not only dependent on how a building is erected, but also upon how it is furnished and staffed.
If you imagine an assembly hall or recreational building, now most of those are furnished, but they also have drapes, they have curtains and so forth. Imagine there's a fire. Now these drapes, if they're not fire retardant, will catch a light, and the surface spread then could then engulf the whole building. So what happens now is that the building code speaks about how those drapes should be, what fire retardant elements need to be placed on them, and in some respects, whether you should have them at all. So it speaks about those elements. And when we think about furnishing, we think about, say, an office building. Now, initially, it may comply with the building code with regards to its means of escape and so on, but then what will happen now is that you fit it out with partitions and so forth, and now they're impeding your means of escape. So when it comes down to fitting out your building, it needs to then go to the Building Standard Authority so they can vet the drawings to ensure that you still have an unimpeded means of escape in case of fire.
One intention of the revised national building codes is to provide all users of buildings with adequate means of escape from fire, as well as easy access for firefighting.
When we talk about alternative means of escape, it doesn't mean you get to the back of the building and you've got a party wall that's only a meter away from the surface of the building or the exterior of the building. That wouldn't be a safe means of escape. So in other words, you would escape outside the building, ensuring that you are safe. So just having an alternative means doesn't mean you've complied. You have to make sure that the occupants are outside safely. So not even the radiated heat could actually affect them. So that's what we mean by alternative means of escape. Imagine a situation that you're a fireman. You've got the alarm that a building is on fire. Let's say a hotel. Now, your first thought is, where is it? Now, in a hotel building, if we was to build a new hotel in Barbados, they would have had to have a control panel, right? This control panel would have been agreed upon by the fire service as to where it should be located. So it should be accessible to them. Now this control panel would then indicate where the actual alarm is and where the fire source is. See? So now they're able to, not having to scramble all over the building to find the fire, they'll be able to know exactly where the fire is. And this is one of the provisions that would help the firefighter in doing his service without hindrance to himself as well and harm to persons.
Air keeps us alive. An adequate supply of air in a building is essential for human occupation. Ventilation can be provided naturally, mechanically, or by a combination of both.
People are generally concerned about indoor air quality, and Barbados National Standard Institution is currently developing a standard for indoor air quality. But when we think about ventilation in buildings, we talk about natural ventilation, and we also talk about air conditioning. The building code speaks about natural ventilation with regards to window openings and how much percentage of windows should be open, etc. But when it talks about air conditioning, this is where perhaps energy conservation can come in with regards to thermal insulation. Now, ones perhaps don't think about thermal insulation apart from it keeps things hot. Perhaps when you're taking your journey in your car, you have a little cup that is thermal insulated in order to keep your drink hot for a longer period. Right, now you think about that. If it was cold drink that you wanted, it would keep it cool as well. So when you think about a building that's been designed, and most buildings today are being designed, commercial buildings that is, offices, are being designed to accommodate air conditioning. So if they were insulated now, and the air conditioning system were on thermostatic controls, then it would keep the building cooler for longer, and therefore not using as much energy. And that's the thought, the general principle with regards to thermal insulation, and it is attached, as it were, to ventilation and air conditioning.
Most of us are aware that noise can be a danger to our health. Excessive noise that is transmitted from one part of a dwelling to another may damage the hearing or even contribute to elevated blood pressure, especially if it is recurring.
Where it comes into play is where you have apartments, apartment buildings, right? Where the transfer of sound can be from your neighbor above or below. So what happens now is that the normal person walking across the floor can be a sound nuisance to your neighbor below. So the building code speaks about how this can be achieved in a way that you don't be a nuisance. I know it's something perhaps that's new to Barbados with regards to sound insulation.
Every dwelling should provide suitable access through at least one entrance for persons with disabilities. The intention is to afford inhabitants the option of inviting physically challenged persons to visit their homes with minimal inconvenience.
Now, when we talk about access, we're talking being able to get to facilities. So they should be able to get to the washroom. If they're in the bank, they should be able to get to the counter and do their business. So the building code will speak about how, if you're building a new bank, how you can address these issues. It's not talking about tomorrow that an existing building needs to comply. Now, the owner of the bank, for example, if it's an existing, may want to consult the building code in order to retrofit if he so desires. But when it comes to designing a new building, then they would seek to ensure that they do comply. Most people, when they think of disability, they think of wheelchair users, right? But you also think about persons that are unable to see. Now, how would they know, for example, that they're going up a ramp or there's a change in gradient? The building code will speak about tactile tilings, which is, I would call it braille on your feet, because then they were able to feel on the ground that there is a change in gradient before they actually reach it. So it captures all of this in the building code.
Sanitation has long been the most basic of public health issues. Safe and adequate provisions for drainage and sanitary facilities serve to ensure that waste and surface water from a building are carried without leakage to a suitable point of disposal.
The building code with regards to drainage is just basically to ensure that the discharge of waste is carried away safely. But what I would say that is perhaps pretty new to Barbados but old for Europe and other places is that drainage also should be tested. Yeah, it's never been done here before, but The problems associated with drainage can be quite acute. For example, if your waste drain is actually leaking before it gets to your soakaway, then this can have an adverse problem with regards to your foundations. Say, for example, if it is that you're on sort of a clay ground condition, it can actually undermine your foundations over the years. So hence, the underground drainage would need to be installed in such a way that it has a proper bed and surround to ensure that no even stones and so forth would actually pierce it. And then when we talk about the above ground drainage, this needs to ensure that it's air tested to ensure that there's no leaks and no foul smells actually in the building itself.
Provision must also be made for facilities within buildings to allow for storage and removal of solid waste.
When we think about in a sort of general domestic sort of situation, you have a waste receptacle. What tells you what size it should be? If you have a development and you have a number of apartments, how many waste receptacles should you have and where should it be located? Now all these are indicated in the actual document with regards to waste disposal. It's really to prevent vermin and diseases and so forth. And to give you a typical example, most of us would put our receptacles out for the dustman to come and pick it up. But we put it out in the road, or do we put it in a hard standing area that can be easily washable? So these are sort of things that it would speak about.
The revised national building codes seek to minimize the risk of accidents caused by built-in hazards and the malfunction of mechanical equipment in and around buildings.
If you imagine you're a tourist on holiday and you happen to go into the foyer, it's just been raining and you slip. Because the tile is not the correct tile that should be on the floor. Now, the building code would speak about what kind of tile you should have on the floor in order to prevent these kinds of incidences. So that's one way the building code speaks about accidents in that way. The building code always speaks about preventative measures. It's not one that speaks about after the case.
The plans for a new building must meet the requirements of the revised building codes before it is constructed.
The first thing to do then would be to submit your plans, get your approval, and you have perhaps a period of 5 years before you actually want to, or if you desire, to submit your plans to the Building Standard Authority. Now the drawings that you submit to Town and Country Planning is totally different to the drawings that you would submit to the Building Standard Authority. They would require more detail with regards to your submission, more information with regards to your construction, the information with regards to the structural information, the design, the means of escape, the travel distance, and of course it's depending on what type of building you're building. So once you've done that, then you would seek to get their approval, and once they've approved your drawings, etc., then it will start the regime of inspecting to ensure that what's on paper is also reflected on site. So that's how we then would capture the building standards requirements. Once it is published, of course, then it's still work in process. You'll find that probably the designers and architects will find problems, concerns, which is not a bad thing, because when they do find it, we're looking forward to their comments. We're looking forward to their suggestions again. And we'll set up a way for them to do that. Most of them that have commented before know how to do it. And we'll have a template set up that they can look at a part that they're having difficulties with or concerns with. They can pinpoint where these concerns are, and they can also give us what they feel is a practical way forward. And then when we have our technical committee meeting, we can address these issues with an amendment and so forth.
When devising blueprints for new buildings, it should be borne in mind that the revised national building codes are not maximum standards. Architects and builders are welcome to go above and beyond the proposed measures.